All right, this is another exciting episode of Social Distillation, the submarine still of the internet, where we attempt to drop the bead and pour white lightning straight on your brain and get banned because we are going to be talking more COVID nonsense. Um, I know we talked previously about vaccines and the numbers and the data and the way the science the studies are being presented so as to manipulate them for a particular uh, narrative. Uh, and there's probably going to be some more of that today. I know one of the things that has been driving me bonkers, or one thing in particular, because I'm pretty well unplugged, but when I go to the gym, I accidentally see the TV sometimes. And there are always several TVs on the news station for some reason, I guess because people hate themselves. Anyway, so the thing I saw that uh, made me want to hurt someone was a headline, a talking point of because people are still hesitant to get the vaccine and it's being pushed, and it was something to the effect of experts still say, or the CDC says, that the vaccine provides the most protection compared to people who haven't gotten it.
You didn't tell me the headline. Is that what they said?
Yeah.
No shit, Sherlock. Compared to people who haven't had it.
No shit, Sherlock.
Did they specify people who were previously infected? No. Okay, so they are correct in saying that.
Yeah.
If you've had the vaccine, you are more protected.
That is 100% correct.
Yeah.
The experts say the science has spoken, and that's a completely irrelevant and stupid statement. It is utter nonsense in the way that it tortures words and logic and says a lot. Sophistry. This is the definition of sophistry. Saying a lot, but actually saying nothing.
Let's get grounded. And more specifically, what we talked about last time was the difference between natural infection versus vaccinated immunity. Mm-hmm. And whether it's a good idea, again, consult your doctor, disclaimer, consult your doctor first, which I know what they're going to tell you, but whatever. The difference between natural immunity versus vaccine immunity, and whether it's worth it from a risk standpoint for someone who has developed natural immunity to go get the vaccine, because there is an increased risk of side effects if you've been previously infected, and including the major side effects. And again, the one we won't know is death, because of we can't get a consent form filled out by someone who died. So that being said, there was information that came out the day we talked, which actually would have been really nice to bring up in that one. And that's where I want to start. So let's go back to natural infection versus vaccine immunity. And then we'll get to the CDC, because we got to build a little bit here. This is Israeli national news. Study recovered COVID patients don't benefit from vaccine. Now, personally, that's a slightly misleading headline. And we'll get to that when we get to the CDC, because I'm going to concede a point to the CDC. But I wanted to start here. This article covers two actual studies. One out of Cleveland, Ohio, which I have here: necessity of COVID-19 vaccination in previously infected individuals. So if you all want to, here's the, I actually linked this one in our last video too. So I'll link it again, but here's the information for those that want to look up the exact study. The quotes from the study are all accurate, but they followed health workers, 52,000, which is actually a pretty good number for a study of this magnitude. And those that they separated, those that were infected and had vaccines, and had vaccines, and those that never did anything. And at the end of the day, they actually had a nil reinfection rate on those that had been previously infected, whether they had a vaccine again or not. So that's where they drew the conclusion that vaccine didn't benefit people who were previously infected, which is really hard to improve on zero reinfections out of 2,500 that previously tested positive out of the 52,000. Yes, 2,579. So that's the number that were infected in the group, and half of those, which is right here, did not receive the vaccine. So at the end of the day, they ended up with this conclusion. So that's the Cleveland, Ohio study, healthcare workers. But then we get a nice giant data compilation out of Israel, because thankfully they're tracking these things, which we'll get to that with the CDC later, which is actually, don't worry, we'll get to that. But out of 835 plus thousand Israelis that have had the virus, only 72 have been reinfected during the time of the study. Out of the 5 million vaccinations, 3,000 were infected. So what those numbers come out to is about a 6.7 times greater protection from reinfection by those that have had the virus versus the vaccine. So if the vaccine is 95% effective, somewhere between 95 and 100 is where being infected is. And I would have to know what the actual infection rate probability is to say how much of that is going to be covered. But somewhere between 95 and 100% effective is actually previous infection. So that's our range. So that's where we start. Thank you, Israel, for tracking these things. You want to add to that before I move on?
Nope.
Nope. Okay. More on the same articles. Next, what else do we know? This is something I also found after we talked. A long-term analysis of the memory with our B cells and T cells and antibody response to SARS-CoV-2. Great news. They remember. There's a durable memory in the T cells and B cells. And this is a great article if you know how to read, if you've got the biology background to follow along. They do a good job of explaining what each of the variables is and what each of the different terms are, difference between the CD8, et cetera. But at the same time, at the end of the day, after 6 and 12-month follow-up, the immune response from your memory T cells and B cells, which are your immune cells, that if anybody brings up long-term response and they use the word antibody, find a new expert, because none of us have a single antibody in our system for mumps or measles or polio or any of the other vaccines we got as a child. We have T cell and B cell memory from that, so that if we ever are exposed to those things, our body fights it right away and creates antibodies. So if you've got a polio antibody in your body, that means you were exposed to it recently. So if anybody brings up antibodies, they're trying to cloud the conversation. They're talking about short-term immunity. But when we talk about memory B cells and T cells, and at the end of the day, our natural killer cells as well, how robust those are, then we're talking long-term immunity. And the good news is, at the end of the day, we are showing a heightened response in those memory cells over a long period of time, to the degree that you saw it immediately after infection. And at the rate that we showed with SARS-CoV-1, which we still have memory for today if you were infected back 17 years ago. So this is great news. Now, further research is needed because we have 12 months of data, and you could have a regression after that. But at the same, I think the average airborne immunity for something like the flu is like 4 years. So at the 4-year mark, maybe we'll get another indicator. But this is great news. This is saying we're having long-term immunity from natural infection. Also great news, except for one marker in the T cells, the vaccine is having long-term. as long as we can know right now, just being 6 months out effects. So we're getting a lot of great news in the long-term immunity. Now, again, that one marker might cause us to need a booster if you were a vaccinated individual. But for natural infection, that's not the case. So we've got studies that show we're better protected, and giant studies. Again, almost 1 million people here. You're better protected from natural infection than vaccine, somewhere between 95 and 100%. It's holding long term. And with those two big giant facts, we go to the CDC. Oh, that's wrong. There we go. This is the study that they're basing a lot of the headline I saw, and this is where I thought you had seen too, was CDC shows you get additional benefit from adding the vaccine to the previous infection. And this is the study they're going off of. I don't even know where to start with my issues with this. First of all, with the Israeli study, we have population data, reinfections divided by the previously infected. Boom, you've got a number. Simple. Anybody can do that math. Basic algebra. We have the hard data with this. With the CDC study, we have a sample, age matched within this time frame with this person, with the control opposite that was not reinfected. What is the term? Using a conditional logistic regression equation to end up with your final number of how likely or how much you would benefit from the vaccine.
I like that you had to go look up this convoluted term, whereas the Israeli study just, did basic division.
Yeah. So here is your equation for this conditional regressive logistic regression calculation. Yeah, I'm pretty damn good at statistics, but there's no way. This is like the sci-fi stuff you would see on the Flash when he's writing on his board with all these symbols to go to a new quantum dimension, right? So that's problem number one. A lot of me wants to say, you listen to the experts say this. Well, it's great to say it when nobody in the country, except for maybe 1% of the top statistics students in the university and professors, can even check their work. So why did we go with that model instead of just tracking reinfections with people who had it and infections with people who had it and the vaccine, and and regular infections with people who are vaccinated, and comparing the numbers like they did in Israel? Why did we do that? Well, part of the reason is they had to work backwards because their samples are between, where's their sample? Between May and June. Yeah, here's your N, by the way, 246 reinfections. And that's combined between infected, no vaccine, infected plus vaccine, with 400 controls. So they used between May and June because, here we go, between May and June, because that's when the vaccine was readily available to everybody, not just older people or frontline workers or et cetera. There's one problem with that timeline. We'll go to the CDC website here. As of May 1st, 2021, the CDC is no longer tracking breakthrough cases for people who are vaccinated. Oh my goodness. We're not tracking the data that they're using to determine this outcome. So they had to go backwards and use all of these different tracking resources that are indirect that and put all the data together. That's why they had to do all of these different matching things, because they had to go backwards and try to get a one-to-one on who was reinfected during this time, what their ages were, do the names match the records, etc. Sorry, dogs are fighting again. Is that coming through loud? Do I need to take care of them?
Yeah, they're pretty loud, but it's just so nonsensical of why would you do this? It makes no sense when you have this just trove of data out there. It also just confuses me that not really, because everything is politicized, and this COVID was almost immediately politicized. I'm remembering back to the dust up Fauci and Rand Paul had months back. I think this was like last summer, so it was before the vaccine was even released, and Dr. Rand Paul made the point of, look, we've got X number of millions of people that have had it and recovered. Why aren't we telling these people to go back to work and live their lives normally? Because this was still in the middle of lockdowns. And then Fauci starts telling him, you don't know what the heck you're talking about, despite the fact that no, he's right. With pretty much every other virus that we deal with, this is how it works. This is what is to be expected. This isn't unexpected.
There's your reinfection rate, by the way.
That is very small.
That is as close to zero as you can almost get.
Mm-hmm.
We'll call that statistically significant. Back to our study here. I wanted to highlight this sentence. One of the reasons they did this study was few real world epidemiologic studies exist to support the benefit of vaccination for previously infected persons. I just showed you two that were giant, not 246 participants, but almost 1 million in one.
Go back to that CDC report. Hold on. The way they word that.
Well, yeah, I guess there is few. There's two giant ones.
To support, no, but am I reading too much into this? But to support the benefit of vaccination for previously infected person, their starting point is to prove that you should be vaccinated even if you have already had the disease.
Mm-hmm.
They're saying right up front that this isn't a real study. This is confirmation bias. We set out to prove, we went looking for numbers to show that you should still get vaccinated.
There is statement A that vaccination on top of natural immunity could provide benefit. So that's been the statement for quite some time. And this is the study they're using to now support the statement they've been making.
Mm-hmm.
So that statement in and of itself is what they're trying to support. First of all, why Kentucky? Why this specific group? I have a feeling that every state has done this, and this is the one that they picked. So there's that. But that's me. That's hyperbole. That is me talking right there. But let's look at the actual facts of it. They say there's almost no real world data. I just showed you two big chunks of real world data, but it is not that many studies. They're big studies, but it's not that many.
My point is those studies don't count because they don't say what we want them to say.
Well, and they also address a different thing, which is where my ultimate point is going to go. They address vaccinated versus previously infected. This investigates vaccinated and infected and just infected. So the number difference between these two studies is almost irrelevant unless you look at it from a different angle. But so that's one statement. Now, where I say they make a false statement, and I actually got to dig more into their sources here, but that laboratory evidence suggests that antibody response is better for variants with but we just showed that it's pretty damn good and actually better than vaccine. Now, again, if vaccine and natural might provide a slightly additional boost,
Right.
but at the same time, their statement that vaccine does better than natural infection would not be true unless you're talking about both together. So,
And even taking their numbers at face value and ignoring the fact that this study is pure confirmation bias, okay, the vaccination on top of previous infection will provide additional immunity, will provide additional support. Okay, to what degree? Because what you're doing with this study is then going out and making blanket statements
here we go.
that
There's your degree
everybody
right there.
that everybody should do this. Okay, so all right,
2.34 times the odds of reinfection. So now this is where I go with this. If you combine those two bits of information, so this is where a complete array of information is better than study says this.
yes.
If I make statement, vaccine provides additional benefit to someone who's had natural immunity to the tune of 2.34 times, that sounds a certain way, but it's 2.34 times the benefit, or the gap between what the benefit already is of having natural infection, which we're going to say it's even with vaccine just for the sake of argument. So that 5% gap that's left is where that 2.34 times will be inside. So it's 2.3 times whatever benefit that is. So we're looking at somewhere between that 95% protection and 100%. So now maybe it's 96% to 100%. Again, to know the exact number, we'd have to know what your odds of getting it without anything is.
Right.
But so this number that we brought up earlier, this 0.000086 number, well, it provides benefit on top of that, to the point of it would be, just throwing a number, maybe 0.0065 or something.
Right.
So actually we could
yeah.
probably do the math with using the 6.7 times more likely and the difference between those. So you would go to, so vaccine alone, natural infection is 6.72 times more effective. And what was it? 2.3 times? 2.3
yeah.
times. So now we're better than regular vaccinated by 9% or 9 times. So you're just adding to that number, but you're practically immune to begin with.
Right.
You're just filling in that gap just a little bit. So your benefit is thousandths of a percent at the end of the day.
Right. And
whereas
have
your
not,
risk of side effect is
exactly,
magnitudes of percent. So if you're 1 to 2% likely to have a major side effect, which is, I think, the FDA numbers, I should have had that ready, 1 to 2% likely to have a major side effect. Now you're 4 to 8% times likely to have a major side effect. When you're talking about allowing the release of a vaccine, 1 to 2% acceptable, 4 to 8%, go back to the drawing board. And so my thousandths of a percent benefit from having the vaccine is far outweighed by my 4 to 8% chance of a side effect. That's 1 every 25 to 12 people versus 1 every 100 to 50. That's a huge difference.
Yeah. And that's the kind of what we talked about previously. That's the kind of information people need to make informed decisions, instead of torturing the numbers and then making a blanket statement. Okay, these are the reinfection rates. These are the infection rates with vaccine. Here are the side effect numbers. because you need to know that if you're going into a vaccine, because that's any vaccine. Now,
or even if we even take the side effects out of it, if my doctor said, yeah, you'll get a couple thousandths of a percent difference by taking this, it's not even worth my time.
Yeah.
Especially since that thousandth of a percent is also with an additional benefit of we've shown better outcomes with reinfection or with infection on top of vaccine. Mm-hmm. So the fact that I could show basically the symptoms of a common cold, if I am one of those 0.0084% people, I mean, shoot, that's not too. We've dealt with better odds.
Yeah.
So yeah, these numbers need to not be used for blanket statements. So this is my thing. CDC could be telling the truth, and all those numbers could check out, and I just don't know enough about statistics to know that that's the best method. And it still not matter in the end because it doesn't make a difference.
Yeah.
Except in Pfizer and Moderna's pocketbook.
Yep.
But at the flip side, knowing that number with the side effect numbers, it does make a difference. And it's actually very irresponsible of our public health organization, which should not be in charge of as much as it is, which we see with the eviction moratorium and stuff. These are not elected officials. These should be a guidance group. These should be advising our elected officials on things, not actually creating policy on their own.
Exactly. So we have given this is the culmination of what conservative libertarians have been ranting about for decades, which is the continual shift of lawmaking power into regulatory bodies. You have regulatory bodies that pass regulations with the force of law, often with severe consequences to people who have no legal recourse to seek any kind of justice. It's no, the regulatory body has spoken, and most of the times with these regulatory bodies too, they completely subvert the Constitution and our ethos when it comes to the criminal justice system, because if you run afoul of a regulatory body, the burden of proof is on you. Even the most infamous one is the IRS. Mm-hmm. If the IRS chooses to audit you, you have to prove to them that everything is on the up and up. They don't have to prove that you broke a law, broke tax law. You have to prove to them, to their satisfaction, that everything is on the up and up. Mm-hmm. And that's how every regulatory body is. And now you add into it, now we're doing it with health, which covers everything.
Well, and specifically to this argument, this is out there for a specific reason, because if you're going to impose a vaccine passport, you need to make sure people who are infected are also included in that. And it's actually a little bit discriminatory to some degree, because when you look at comorbidities to actually taking the vaccine, everybody let me preface this with vaccine or any medication, any medical adverse reaction to taking a medication is not a random event. It is a sign of something in their system that was not compatible with that vaccine. Mm-hmm. And that's why we have the exemptions, medical exemptions, which I could probably get because I do have an underlying heart condition. And since some heart conditions are associated with the vaccine, even though they're rare, I could probably get that because I would be more likely to have that reaction because I have this underlying issue. If someone had a reaction without knowing what the underlying issue is, well, guess what? That's a sign. Maybe go get checked for an underlying issue that's associated with your reaction. Maybe an autoimmune disease or a marker for a lung disorder you didn't know about. Or that's actually a good thing because you might have had an early warning if you thought you were perfectly healthy in some way, shape, or form. But then we also have knowns. People who have certain conditions shouldn't be taking the vaccine. We should add to that known someone who's had COVID. That's a comorbidity because it's associated with a 4 times risk of reaction. And the reaction is probably, if you really dove into this, would be associated with their major effects from COVID. So if someone had a serious lung issue and a cardiopulmonary issue, they probably had a cardiopulmonary issue with the vaccine if they had a reaction. Mm-hmm. If they had the brain response like I did, they probably had a brain response with the reaction. If they were just intensely sick, I bet you they got intensely sick and nauseous with the vaccine. And I bet you those would correspond with how they responded to the actual disease. So why can't we include having had the disease as an exemption from having the vaccine? Because we know we have a better outcome. We know we have an increased risk. And if you're talking vaccine passports, why can't we have a previously infected passport?
Well, if you're talking vaccine passports, screw you and move to China, first of all. Secondly, I think the big takeaway here is that it is not remotely irrational to have questions and concerns about the vaccine, but that is how it is being framed. The latest dust up that I heard about was Kirk Cousins has said, no, he's not going to get the vaccine. And he thinks that the NFL, the woke FL's rules on this are incredibly heavy handed. He's not wrong. Now you can disagree. You can think that he should get the vaccine for reasons 1, 2, 3. Fine. But he has his own perfectly rational reasons for not doing it. Mm-hmm. And to talk in such severe language is, I mean, detrimental in so many ways. Looking at the numbers we just laid out here, you're going to force people to make a decision against their judgment, which could have serious health consequences for them.
Well, yeah. I think that's the best way to fight the issue. But tribalism, it's not even, this one got complicated. This one got very complicated because your non-vaccinated is not split across political lines. Mm-hmm. It's split across socioeconomic lines. Your typical non-vaccinated person right now is lower in social economic status than your typical vaccinated person right now. Go ahead.
And it's creating one of these hilarious, because I'm a bad person, so I laugh at it, collisions between the radical regressive left and the talking points in the critical theorists in the media, because there are a lot of people who aren't getting the vaccine are minorities. Well, you've just spent the last years telling them that the system is rigged and out to get them, that Whitey wants to kill them. And now you're telling them to go let Whitey save you by giving you this experimental vaccine that was rushed through the normal processes. Mm-hmm. And now you're going to ridicule them for saying, I don't think so. I'm not going to get that. That doesn't make any sense.
I'm wondering how this is going to end up manifesting, because you almost, when we talk about tribalism, you people are going to, that could be malleable.
Mhm.
And because we're having this social push, kind of like the fascists of Nazi Germany, of the pure versus the unpure, uh, and actually purity being a high value trait of conservatives, uh, and a social gap between who is going to be considered the pure and who's going to be considered the unpure. Do we have a realignment of allegiance in this tribal debate with the people who are, we use the term the media is using, vaccine hesitant, versus the people who are pushing it?
Mhm.
And I don't know. I'd like to see if I hate to see, but I wonder if there's going to be a realignment of allegiance, not on racial, but on class grounds when this is all said and done, because they're pushing people to start to defend themselves, and it's not along Democrat, Republican, or right left
Mhm.
lines.
Mhm.
It's on trust in the establishment lines, trust in your elite lines. So I don't know. It's going to be an interesting few years, I think, but we're going to keep just providing information. Again, if you are concerned about getting vaccinated, consult your doctor, who's going to tell you yes, obviously, but also be able to present data to that doctor. And if they can't answer it, probably find a different doctor and get a second opinion with someone who can answer it. And if they answer
Yep.
it better than we did, then great for them. And send us the information they gave you in the comments, because we can always learn too.
Yep. Yep.
Again, post hoc disclaimer: we're not medical professionals. I don't design vaccines, and listen to your doctor, not your politician.
That's good advice in general.
Anything else you wanted to add to that, or do we want to completely pivot and do the last thing we want to talk about?
Well, I don't know how much of a pivot it is, but go ahead.
Okay, well, it is still political. Uh, Something that's come across my news feed lately is something to the extent of this: what we're taught, and they give you a thing about the GI Bills, and then what we would be taught with critical race theory, and they give you an example of how Black people were screwed back in the 1940s due to those GI Bills. Then another one. Whoops, where's the that one? There we go. A nice little emotionally triggering panel on the left, redneck with a Confederate flag, another Confederate flag in the background. We must preserve our heritage. And then that same redneck tearing a paper that says critical race theory, lessons banned, and we must bury our heritage, with the Tulsa massacre up on the board. And last, those who ignore the past are doomed to repeat it. A upright hominid, and it digresses down to legislatures, limits on teaching about racism. Shut up. And so our apish nature wanting to shut down talk of racism in the past. So those are the things floating across our news feeds by people who are trying to spread a message. And the overall message is critical race theory is about teaching our children about events in the past, uncomfortable events in the past, like the 1921 massacre or slavery, etc., because we want them to be, we're afraid of facing those past situations and the history of racism in the US. It's a big problem. Those are all lies. Not lies in those events didn't happen. The Tulsa massacre happened. The government did mess up the loan program to exclude the Black Americans coming back from war. Those happened. The lie is that's not what critical race theory teaches you. That actually has zero to do with critical race theory.
Yep.
That's just history. That's just history that we actually should teach about. That's
Right.
fine. Nobody's fighting that. Not even the redneck that wants to keep the statue up.
Well, the one that annoys me is the 1921 Tulsa massacre. Um, as as sad and tragic a piece of history it is actually a somewhat small part of US history. And if you're talking about a survey class that's covering a lot of things, yeah, that's going to get missed. There's a lot that's going to get missed. You might have a brief mention of the massacre at Wounded Knee. There were a bunch of other massacres of and by Native Americans that aren't going to get mentioned because it's a survey class.
But even still, it's critical. It's the idea that critical race theory is a push to put these things in class. It's not.
Yes. Yes.
Critical race theory actually has nothing to do with those events. And if we wanted to have a movement that said include this in class, okay, it's relevant history. Yeah, maybe some other things we could put in there too, or we could prioritize. We do have a time constraint, but if we wanted to say we have to teach about this, okay, that's fine. I'm even cool with having a class that's American history and slavery or something like that. That is accurate. It has to be accurate. So there's that caveat. That's fine, whether it's an elective or whatever, because it's a mistake we don't want to make again. The same with your Wounded Knee example. If we want to have Native American history, post-colonialism or something like that, that's fine, as long as it's accurate and it's a course that we take in perspective. But it's the misleading message of these memes. It's critical race theory is not Black history. Critical race theory is not Indigenous history. Critical race theory is a legal theory on structural racism built inherent in a system because of power dynamics and hierarchies. That's what critical race theory is. Now, those are examples of how they might have manifested in the past, but it is not critical race theory.
Yes.
It's the misleading message. And that's my main point with all this. If you can't get somebody on board with your cause by telling the truth, maybe your cause sucks.
Well, and it's the big lie too, because there's so much lying that is happening in those obnoxious memes that it's absolutely brazen. It's standing outside and declaring that you are Napoleon Bonaparte and the sky is purple. No, you're not, and no, it's not. And this is why I say it's not a complete pivot, because take that last one, for example, with the legislatures shut up and their, legislatures are monkeys. And I thought calling someone a monkey was a slur, but anyway, okay. Have you actually read the bills that are being proposed? Because I bet you haven't. Just like the hard push towards blanket vaccination. Have you actually looked at the numbers? Have you actually looked at the studies you're using to cite that? Because we just showed them, and I'll bet you haven't, Mr. Strawman that I'm building out of all of the black and white nonsense that I'm seeing on TV. Same thing here. You're using the fact that a bill exists to combat your pet little thing here to say, aha, see, confirmation bias. This supports what I've been saying all along. No, it doesn't. You haven't actually read the bill. Show me the specifics, because I guarantee you it's not in there, because I have looked at some of these stupid things and I've listened to people talking about them. And
there's not a single provision that says do not teach Black history of Black people in the United States. Which
the other way it's a lie is that we have been teaching that for most high school history classes, just because of the constraints of time. It doesn't cover the whole of American history. It starts at the Civil War. Okay. And it tells you that the Civil War was started because of slavery, and here's why. And it also
does touch before that, but more in a contextual manner
to contextualize the Civil War. And you also get civil rights figures as history progresses. You get some people like Booker T. Washington, W.E. Du Bois, and then on into the 50s and 60s civil rights movement. But it's a survey class. All that stuff that you were talking about getting more into the details of racial division, the history of racial division in the United States. That's a specific. That's like complaining that the high school history course doesn't get into the specifics of the battles of World War II. Well, that's a specialization. We just want to talk about World War II in general, because this is basic knowledge that you need to have imparted to you before you graduate high school. And then if you want to study on your own, or if you want to take these courses when you go to a college, good for you. But to say that, one, it's not being covered, no, it is. And two, these specific things that I think are a big deal weren't covered. Okay, well, those are specialized, detailed cases, and you're using that to criticize a survey course. It's nonsense.
Well, I do think we, in the nature of simplifying things, we do tend towards the positive aspects of even the negative things in our society. Like you said, the Civil War, which also was a product of emancipation, which is awesome because we were the first country in the Western world to eliminate slavery. And they, or even the civil, then we jump to civil rights. You know, we jump from Civil War to civil rights, ignoring kind of those negative parts in the middle. And if you want to say, make it a more balanced regimen, that would even be acceptable. But again, it's the misleading nature of the meme to garner support. So basically support against the bills so they can keep putting their other poison into the system, which is not related to the things they have in the meme. Now, if they came out and said, there's an oppression hierarchy, blah, 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 and people supported them, well, what can we say about that? We lost the battle.
Yeah.
Right? But they're not being honest. And that's the big issue that I have with this whole movement is it's inherently based on dishonesty.
Yeah.
And this is just another manifestation of it. It's kind of winning the meme war, though. It really is.
Yeah. Because it's perfectly built for memes. This type of dishonesty and this type of black and white thinking, these false dichotomies are perfect. I mean, the ones you just showed there, it's, you know, block one, block two. Oh, outrage. Okay, except that's not real life. That's not how life actually works. There's all this stuff in between. There's all this stuff on the outsides. So it's perfectly built for memes, and it's perfectly built for people who frankly want to think less and less. Nobody looks at a meme and thinks critically about it. And if you do, well, then you're a dummy who's just complaining about a joke. Well, except it's not a joke, because you're taking this as fact, and you're using that fact to push political and social agendas.
Yeah, the person who posted two of those that I got it from, it was the beginning of COVID. And remember, in the beginning, it was a complete flip-flop between those who were concerned about it, those who weren't, and what should be done about it. And it all centered around what Trump did. Whatever Trump did, they just picked the opposite opinion. And there was a meme that was 3 flip-flops away, and I was like, well, that contradicts what you said here and here and here and here and here. And the answer was, it's a meme. Like, that's not really an answer. Yeah, it is.
That's not an answer. And you are, it's not just a meme, because you are flip-flopping too. That was your point.
What was the Schmachtenberger quote? You were a memetic propagator. It just comes across your face and you go, oh, I'm emotionally triggered. Share. But yeah, but that's the design, because who's not going to be emotionally triggered by this? The Confederate guy talking about keeping, I'm assuming that's Robert E. Lee on the,
It's Confederacy
oh, is it? Okay, yeah,
at
that's
all.
the Confederacy at all. Yeah, okay. So who's not going to be triggered by that? And then you take that same emotion and you move it over to the right because that's the same guy tearing apart what they're claiming to be critical race theory and not wanting to teach about Black history. So it's trying to hijack your limbic system to, like we talked about before with that emotional reactionary response. And now you have to contradict your own limbic system with your rational system to even have an opinion contradictory to the meme on the right. So, which most people can't do. I think it's not that they're incapable, it's that they're very unlikely to be able to handle that unless you practice it.
Well, and this is where I've gotten disillusioned with the right too. This may seem like a tangent, but I'll bring it around here. I'd always felt that the right, people who were more conservative, capital C, were better at that because the uh, the visual aspects of our culture are all left. They always have been. The media and academia have always been left. They've just gotten more and more so lately. So if I see that meme, I immediately think critically about it, not just because I disagree with it, because if I'm not thinking critically about it, oh, I'm just going to get triggered and outraged, just like the person who agrees with it is going to get outraged, but for different reasons. But I'm forced to think critically about it because I've been beaten down by media and academia for so long that I have to have an answer because I'm forced to make arguments and defend myself, etc., and so forth. And in that one in particular, here's why. So the block on the left is the dumb redneck with the Confederate flag, and he is a caricature of Southern racist. Okay, but here's the problem with that portrayal, because at a certain point in time, that was true. But something that is not taken into account by the people who love to smear Southerners, white Southerners, as racists, is the fact that starting in 1978, I think is when it first came out, for a whole generation of people, the Confederate flag wasn't the Confederate States of America. It was the Dukes of Hazzard. It was the General Lee. Okay, it was a sign.
They've been canceled.
It was a sign of Southern rebelliousness and small r and independence and sticking your thumb in the eye of corrupt authority. Okay, that's what that flag was. Now you can say those people were wrong to think that, and they were. I can understand that because I've actually read the Confederate States of America Constitution. Have you? No, shut up. So you can make the point that those people are wrong, but you can't just ad hominem destroy them. That's not who those people are. The other reason that block on the left is misleading nonsense is because Southerners, there are plenty of Southerners who had already been moving away from that heritage. It was Southerners, a lot of them Republican conservative Southerners, who started getting rid of the Confederate flag, started moving them, and started having the conversation of which parts of this heritage should we talk about? How should we talk about this? So, for instance, there are people who revere Robert E. Lee, not because he fought to uphold slavery, but because as a person, he was, even in his time, considered the marble man. He was among the most ethical and moral men of his day, and he conducted himself in a way that had he gone ahead and sided with the Union and accepted Lincoln's offer of taking control of the army, he would be, well, not anymore because everyone's getting canceled. He would be one of the most revered people in all of American history. That's why Robert E. Lee is revered by a lot of people, because you can have two thoughts in your head at one time, that he was wrong to support the Confederacy. He was wrong because he was a slave owner, but he was also a good and decent man. These two things can be true at the same time.
I'm blanking on who said it, but I just heard this the other day. Someone talking about Thomas Jefferson. It would be right to call Thomas Jefferson a great man. It would be also wrong to call him a good man. And a great man in his achievements, a good man in the fact that he did have those parts of his life where he should have, he could have, should have been better. You know, so you can make that exact statement about your example of Robert E. Lee. It'd be right to call him a great man, but it'd be wrong to call him a good man, because he did make ultimately one of the wrong decisions. But again, you're only as good as the information you have, and a lot of this stuff is geographical. But and who knows? We don't know what influences he had in his decision. Someone could have come with a perfectly compelling argument that would have sounded right to all of us for him to make that decision. It might not have been him saying, well, my slaves versus this right thing to do, and being, you know.
Well, it wasn't. It was at that time, and we don't have this nearly as much anymore unless you live in Texas, yeehaw. At the time, people were far more attached to their state than the country as a whole. So he saw it, you know, a lot of people have that feeling of, you know, right or wrong, but my country first. And his country was Virginia. So right or wrong, Virginia. Now you can contrast that to other people at the time who, Sam Houston, was ousted as governor of Texas because he refused to go along with secession. And so there were people at the time who, you know, did go against, but this is why he made that decision. And you have to understand this in order to critique it, which these people don't understand this. You also have to understand this in order to be really critical of the people who deserve criticism, like Nathan Bedford Forrest. That is a statue that we can agree. Now, just on general principle, we shouldn't be Talibaning everything and blowing stuff up because we don't like it. Like I'm for people who don't know, I'm referring to an instance where they destroyed 1,000-year-old sculptures because they, you know, were attached to Buddhism or Hinduism or whatever, and so they were blown up. Just as a matter of art and history, we shouldn't be destroying these things, but you can certainly make a case for moving some of these things out of places of reverence. And
there are still busts of Nero.
Yeah,
you know,
because I mean, can you imagine someone running around and say, and rightfully so, saying, look at all the terrible, horrible things Caligula did. We should destroy all his statues. Let's tear them down. Statues are 2,000-year-olds, you jackwagon. Have a little respect for history, even if you think that history was bad. So, for instance, the statue of Robert E. Lee, we can talk about him in a way that is respectful because he was a man deserving of respect, even if he was wrong. On the other hand, yeah, we should absolutely take statues of Nathan Bedford Forrest and move them somewhere not in a place of reference, because Nathan Bedford Forrest was a vicious man who committed war crimes and after the war helped start the KKK. Yeah. So yeah, maybe we shouldn't have statues of him up in public places of reference. We can have that discussion, but that's not what critical theory is. It's not having a rational, nuanced discussion about these things. It's saying, because there is a statue of Nathan Bedford Forrest, because there is a statue of Robert E. Lee, oppression hierarchies.
No, I'm going to say I'm going to push back on that one just a minute, because that's not what critical theory is. That would be a dishonest representation of critical theory too. It's a side effect of critical theory.
It's used as evidence to support the critical
Well,
theory.
again, so it has as much to do with critical theory as the memes I showed.
Mm.
They are natural side effects of the ideology, versus the memes before were lead-in drugs to the ideology. And because the lead-in drug is similar to the side effect, you're going to end up in this continuous circle. But critical theory itself is not that. It adds justification to the tearing down.
Mm-hmm.
But in and of itself, you can have critical theory, go through the process, dismantle the structural hierarchies, and still have statues everywhere. You can have that, but it doesn't happen that way because of human nature on the other end of it. So human nature is being used to draw people in with these unfortunate facts of history.
And then being used to whip people into a frenzy so that they go nuts and they destroy property.
By natural, yeah. So yeah, then they need to be whipped into a frenzy to dismantle the current system. And because those statues end up being a symbol of the system, they end up being kind of a sacrificial lamb along the way.
Mm-hmm.
But it's also part of the arrogance of the leaders involved here, because I brought this up with the Black National Anthem, is there is a sense of, what more can we make you do? What can we get you to do? Tear down that statue. Maybe it started with the Bedford Forest. Mm-hmm. Okay, that's good. You did that. Let's do Robert E. Lee. And people go, hey, wait a minute. Evidence of racism. Mm-hmm. Right. Now I'm going to give you the liberal perspective on that meme with the and this is a secondary tactic inside here. This is a very genius meme. It really is. Because you have the guy on the left, the redneck, the stereotypical racist Southerner, saying we need to keep this shit up. Now on the right, you have that same guy tearing apart the critical race theory. So now if you identify as a liberal, educated intellectual,
that's a good point.
You are making the choice of, I'm that guy, subconsciously, I'm that guy, or I support critical race theory.
Yep.
And that got some of the best intellectuals in the world in the election debate, because people like Steven Pinker and Sam Harris were defending to the death the fact that we needed to get rid of Trump, because and part of it, and it had very little to do with Trump. Mm-hmm. It had to do with not wanting to be associated with Trumpers.
Yeah.
And
or more specifically, the caricature of Trumpers.
Mm-hmm. It was this dissociation from reality, where I can disagree with what's happening in the Democratic Party without being a populist, nationalist, right-wing Trump supporter. Mm-hmm. And that the left did a very good marketing campaign to make sure that was in the thought of every intellectual leftist in the business that had a big audience, especially. You go everywhere from those two intellectuals that I talked about to someone like Bill Maher, or who else was who's canceled now but was a big Biden supporter in the beginning. But the argument was always, it's going to be the old Biden. He's going to be just an establishment guy, and we're going to go through the same stuff we did with Obama and Bush.
We're going to go back to normal.
We're going to go back
to normalcy.
And that was the big argument. And the big blind spot was, no, he's actually already doing the stuff we're seeing now. Mm-hmm. And when you talk about the independent voter or even the moderate leftist, they were still suckered into that. I don't want to be a Trump supporter, which is really sad, because that's one of the major reasons Trump was the wrong man for the job. Yeah. And here we are now because of that. But this meme takes advantage of that same concept, because you're subconsciously trying to dissociate yourself from that redneck Confederate flag waving yeehaw, and still also opposing what you know to be not the representation that's shown on the right panel. So it's a pretty good way of creating a blind spot for people to just not oppose the message.
Yeah. Well, I think that's a good sound bit of advice to wrap things up on, is critically think about your memes, folks.
Well, even the ape meme, you're making the decision. I'm the upright, virtuous person on the left versus the ape on the right. So when you really have to say, no, this is inaccurate because it's not the ape on the right. It's a person making a decision, and it's actually being misrepresented. All right. Yeah, we should wrap it up. This is a pretty good one. We'll be back next week. I don't know what do we want to tease a topic? What do we want to talk about?
I have no idea what we're going to talk about. So
we'll see what the news we'll see what the news of the week is.
See
we
what
probably
outrages us.
could go into the eviction moratorium because we'll have basically 2 weeks of it going down.
Yeah. So
at that point, we'll
see
have
if there's any
updates
data
on
of
the
what's
legal
going
case.
on.
I'll follow the legal guys I follow, and we'll see what's going on there.
All right. Until then.